Hello and welcome to this Witness History podcast from the BBC World Service with me, Rebecca Kesby. Today we head back to the 1970s to the county of Yorkshire in the north of England, where a group of women decided to confront a prolific serial killer by deliberately protesting at night, the time he chose to attack his victims. The first Reclaim the Night march took place in November 1977 in the northern English city of Leeds. It was organised by the Leeds Revolutionary Feminist Group and was in reaction to the attacks of one of Britain's worst serial killers and the police response to them, including their advice for all women to stay at home after dark.
Quite apparent now that he's going to strike and continue to strike until he's caught. Every woman is at risk.
How then can women protect themselves?
Well, obviously, a woman late at night or early hours of the morning should not be walking out alone in the streets.
Best advice, of course, is not to go out unaccompanied.
We were actively involved in saying, look, it's not realistic, it's not fair to say to women that we should stay in at night. It's a man who's the problem, and the problem is you don't know which man.
Al Garthwaite was one of the women who organised that first march in 1977.
And yet men were not being told to stay in. It was women who were being told to stay in. So we were very angry, and anger can be quite a motivating force in getting away from the fear.
And 2 years after the first known murder, fear was rising in Leeds.
Police in West Yorkshire believe they've found a link between 5 murders of women in Leeds and Bradford over the past 20 months.
The latest victim of the killer is dangerously ill after being battered and knifed on Saturday night. Senior detectives have openly admitted for the first time that they now believe one man could be responsible for all the attacks.
I remember in 1975 reading in the local newspaper that a woman's body had been found on the playing fields about a mile from where I lived.
Al was living in the Chapeltown area of Leeds at the time, where many of the first attacks took place in the mid-70s.
It was headlines for a few days and then we heard no more. But after that, there was then another killing and then another, and her body was found on the adventure playground just next to where we took our children to the nursery. I'd actually been at a party with friends in the neighbouring street that very night, and we'd walked right past the adventure playground on our way home. It does make you feel very much as though this man is around. The victim may well have been there at the point when I walked past, and it did give me a bit of a jolt, because I'd never really been fearful going out at night. I'd had sexual harassment, I'd had attempted assaults on me, but they were from men I knew, not from a random stranger.
Chapeltown was a fairly working-class area, but with real pockets of poverty and a notorious so-called red light district. It's thought some of the early known victims were sex workers. Some had been seen in bars shortly before they disappeared, and that initially led police to the assumption that the killer was targeting sex workers and women who liked to drink or nightclubs in some sort of twisted moral crusade. The message was that if a woman didn't engage in those types of activities, she was safe. But that if she did, she put herself at risk.
Girls have got to realise not to go out at night.
They should not move about at night without an escort. I hope they will be sensible about it.
We just do not have enough policemen in West Yorkshire to guard every woman who chooses to go out on her own at night.
A lot of people thought that if a woman had got attacked, it was in some way her fault. Why was she in that place at that time on her own? The police were busily telling women to stay at home, and in the meantime, you had all sorts of women, such as nurses coming off their shift, those who clean offices at night. There's all sorts of women who need to be out and about, going home late. The police had very much put it out that it was about women who were involved in sex work and that other women needn't worry. Well, that was rubbish, obviously, and drawing these distinctions. Where it could be, it was made to be the woman's fault, or because her lifestyle was such that somehow she'd put herself into danger and into the way of a man who then just followed his instincts.
This is BBC Radio Leeds. Police are investigating the discovery of a woman's body on a playing field in the Chapeltown district.
It was when the body of a teenage girl, just 16 years old, was found in mid-June 1977 that the narrative changed. The police and the media stressed that she was an innocent victim.
We became increasingly angry by the way that the media portrayed the situation. Really offensive things about now an innocent woman has been killed, as if the previous women had been in some way guilty or deserved their death.
And that in his last two murders he's quite deliberately avoided those areas and has killed two innocent women connected in no way with prostitution.
They'd got what was coming to them, whereas these other women were innocent and therefore their death was so much more to be regretted. And that, in our Women's Liberation Group, made us feel very, very angry indeed.
As time went on, the number of victims increased, including in other towns and cities across the north of England. There was a pattern emerging. All the victims suffered blunt force injuries to their head and other horrific stab wounds to their bodies. But there the similarities ended. The victims were shop assistants, students, sex workers, bank clerks, civil servants, homemakers, black, white, young, middle-aged. The only thing they all had in common was that they were women.
This morning, police said they thought they were looking for a woman-hating psychopath who'd stabbed and beaten to death the 5 women.
You see, we still feel that someone must know of a man with these sort of propensities, that someone has a hatred of women, and he's mentioned this to other people.
The atmosphere then became one of quite fearfulness. And as more murders followed, more and more women became very fearful. Some women stopped going out at night altogether. Some gave up their jobs. They gave up evening classes, social life, unless they were out with their husband or boyfriend. In extreme case, some women wouldn't even take their rubbish out to put it in the bin.
When I'm scared to go out by myself now.
You're on the alert all the time. You can't relax.
Have you ever thought that you might leave? Would it drive you to that?
Yes.
Doesn't that mean throwing up a good job?
It would, yes. Safety factor comes first.
The media had given the killer a nickname, the Yorkshire Ripper. It was probably inspired by the 19th century Jack the Ripper in London because of the macabre mutilations he inflicted on his victims. The name became widely used, even by police.
I really hate the way that serial killers are given these nicknames. It makes them into sort of mythological figures. Calling him the Ripper gave him a character, a personality. It made him into this big towering figure, rather than a horrible man who liked to kill women. And that further diminishes women. This idea did become some sort of joke to some of the men. And I know at the Leeds United football matches, the football crowd of men would chant, "Ripper 12, police 0, as if the whole thing was a spectator sport. And then they would sing this song, "There's only one Yorkshire Ripper, one Yorkshire Ripper," and almost as if they were proud. It was grotesque.
By the end of the 70s, at least 11 women had been killed, and many more attacked. It was the biggest, most expensive manhunt in British history.
The whole inquiry up to date has cost in excess of £3 million. More than
thousands of men had been interviewed by police, but they were still no closer to catching the killer. Some of the best evidence they had came from survivors, who described a small man with a dark beard and a distinctive gap in his teeth. They described his voice. Several swore that their attacker had a local Yorkshire accent. But in 1979, the police released letters they'd received and an audio tape from a man claiming to be the killer.
"I'm Jack. I see you are still having no luck catching me. I have the greatest respect for you,
But
George."
his accent was not local. It came from the northeast of England. The police presented it as a strong new lead, but in fact, it would later be discovered that it was a hoax.
It can't be much good, can they?
The police seemed to believe that this was the man that they were looking for. And yet, the women who'd survived the attacks were saying, no, this man had a Yorkshire accent. A lot of the information that survivors gave was incredibly accurate, and yet it was completely overlooked by the police because it was women who were saying it. And some man who was later exposed as a hoax could just send a tape and he would be believed above all the women who'd been attacked and survived.
Al Garthwaite and the Leeds Revolutionary Feminist Group decided to try to challenge the narrative.
We just won't have it. We will not have a curfew. We can't even go in ones and twos.
Women are at risk, and perhaps it's sensible to stay off the streets at night.
I really, really reject this. This is absolute nonsense. Why don't you and all men consider what is happening? Why should women be asked to stay at home?
Because a homicidal maniac is roaming the streets waiting to kill them.
One homicidal maniac. All women throughout the country are being terrorised.
They organised the first of many Reclaim the Night marches on the evening of the 12th of November 1977. Other women's groups across the country joined in.
We carried flaming torches and we shouted slogans such as, however we dress, wherever we go, yes means yes, no means no, and women reclaim the night. And as we walked along, men were coming out of a particular pub and they came towards us going, women, as if they were going to grab us. And we advanced towards them with our torches and they shrank back. That felt very powerful and very empowering indeed. It was a terrific moment. To be able to go to work, to be able to go to study, to be able to go out and meet friends. We need to be able to do that without looking over our shoulders. It's a distraction. It takes away from our freedom.
On January the 2nd, 1981, Peter Sutcliffe was arrested in the city of Sheffield for a minor traffic offence. The arresting officers noticed he bore a striking resemblance to the photo-fit images of the so-called Yorkshire Ripper based on survivors' testimonies. He had a strong local accent. It's understood he'd previously been questioned by officers investigating the attacks 9 times. He was later found guilty of 13 murders and 7 attempted murders, though the true number of victims may never be known.
When Peter Sutcliffe was arrested, overwhelming feeling of relief. I think all women felt that. The experience of that time, living through the fear and the way that women's voices were completely discounted, made me a very vigorous campaigner against violence against women that lasts to this day. We should remember the women, that they were all women who were victims and deserve to be remembered with respect.
The Reclaim the Night marches continued for years and have inspired several other women's movements all over the world. Al Garthwaite still lives in Leeds and is an elected member of the local government. She was speaking to me, Rebecca Kesby, for this Witness History podcast from the BBC World Service.